Hi there, and welcome back to the ADHD Roller Coaster Podcast. I'm Gina Pera. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that rarely gets discussed, at least not accurately or in enough depth. That topic is sex. More specifically, how ADHD can sometimes create a surprising reaction after sex. Irritability, sadness, even outright jerkiness. Folks who experience this enough might learn to avoid sexual intimacy altogether. Now, you might be thinking, wait, what? Yes, it's a real phenomenon. It even has a name, postcoital dysphoria. Some call it the post-sex blues or postcoital tristesse, the French word for sadness. And while it's not exclusive to ADHD, the neurobiology of ADHD can absolutely set the stage for it. The blog post on which this podcast episode is based remains one of readers' longtime favorites. You'll find the link in the podcast description, or search for my blog, ADHD Roller Coaster. Talking about specific ADHD-related challenges to sexual intimacy. That's the conversation I began having publicly decades ago, long before it was acknowledged by the broader mental health field or even ADHD specialists. In fact, I included a chapter on the topic in my first book, Is It You, Me, or Adult ADD? And later expanded that chapter into a short book titled Adult ADHD and Sex, What You Need to Know That Sex Therapists Cannot Tell You. You'll find a link in the podcast description. Dr. Arthur Robin and I also included an in-depth chapter on ADHD and intimacy in our clinical guide, ADHD-Focused Couple Therapy, Clinical Interventions. In this podcast, I'll explain just one phenomenon, post-sex blues. Let's dive in. What this means for the dopamine vulnerable. Here's the simple version. What goes up must come down. During sex, and especially orgasm, the brain gets flooded with dopamine. This feels good. But afterward, dopamine levels drop, sometimes significantly below their original baseline. Now, think about people who are already dopamine vulnerable. Their systems are often underpowered to begin with. So after that spike, the crash can feel even more intense. What might follow? Irritability, poor focus, restlessness, even a flare-up of other ADHD symptoms. For some people, this can last for hours. For others, days, and sometimes even longer. Start out laughing, end up crying? This whole dopamine spike and drop reminds me of something I heard growing up. My friend's dad used to warn us when we were getting too giddy. Start out laughing, end up crying. Turns out he was onto something. When we kids got hysterical laughing, sure enough, one or two of us would end up crying or storming off. Not all of us, but always the same few. Reasons were unclear. Now I wonder, were those kids more neurobiologically sensitive and had greater difficulty regulating emotions? Maybe even undiagnosed ADHD? Gaming, sex, and emotional whiplash. Years ago, I noticed something similar in my husband. Even after he began treatment for ADHD, he would become incredibly irritable after playing video games like StarCraft. Happy during the game, mean and short-tempered afterward, sometimes for hours. He would act as if I'd wronged him somehow, even if I hadn't said a word. Eventually, I pointed it out firmly, and to his credit, he saw it. Out went StarCraft. That change didn't fix everything, but it stopped making things worse. This is the same dopamine spike crash dynamic. And yes, it can happen after sex. Postcoital tristesse, after sex, sadness or irritability. Some people experience an emotional shift after orgasm, sadness, depression, or irritability. This isn't new. The term post-coital tristesse has been around for centuries. In fact, one reader asked me, "Gina, is having ADHD the reason I cry after sex?" Another said, "My husband becomes a jerk the next day. He denies it, but it's like clockwork. I feel like I'm being punished for having sex." Sometimes, especially in men, sadness expresses itself as irritability, and many times neither partner realizes what's really going on. The partner feels rejected. The ADHD partner feels off, or defensive, or empty. Nobody understands that it might be a neurochemical reaction. This confusion can damage relationships. One woman told me it motivated her to leave her marriage, not because of the behavior itself, but because her husband denied it was happening. Historical observations. Even the ancient Greek physician Galen noted, "Every animal is sad after coitus except the human female and the rooster." That might not hold up perfectly, but philosophers, writers, and scientists across centuries have noticed something about the post-sex emotional drop. The philosopher Spinoza described how sensual pleasure blinds the mind, and after it passes, sadness follows. Perhaps the football coaches who forbid sex before a game have read Spinoza. Of course, not everyone experiences this. Just like only a few of those kids ended up crying after laughter, some people are more sensitive to this shift than others. Psychological causes can include guilt, regret, or a sense of emotional emptiness. But physical causes, those are increasingly gaining scientific attention, especially for people with ADHD. Orgasm as a heroin rush. A research team in 2003 compared orgasm to a heroin rush in the brain. Think about that. That's a powerful surge of dopamine. And just like with heroin or other drugs, that surge is followed by a sharp drop, lower than where you started. For people with ADHD, this might mean their symptoms feel even worse than before. That could show up as impatience, anger, emotional shutdown, hyperactivity, or withdrawal. Evolutionary biologists suggest orgasm is great for reproduction, but not always ideal for stable emotional bonding. Our wiring isn't always in sync with our modern relationship goals. What can you do about it? First, let's be clear. Orgasms do not cause ADHD, but some people with ADHD might be more biologically vulnerable to post-orgasm emotional shifts. Step 1. Understand the pattern. Recognizing that this might be neurobiological can ease the hurt. It's not about rejection. It's not moral failure. It's your brain trying to regulate itself. Step 2. Consider medication support. Some psychiatrists have treated post-coital tristesse with SSRIs, antidepressant medications like Prozac or Zoloft. These can reduce sexual intensity, but also blunt the post-orgasm crash. Others find help through stimulant medication. Many individuals report that after starting ADHD treatment, sex became more relaxed, more emotionally connected, and less rushed. They could linger, cuddle, stay present. That might be because the dopamine curve got smoother, more like a gentle hill than a roller coaster. Step 3. Explore alternatives like Karezza. Karezza is an old method of sexual bonding without orgasm. It emphasizes the plateau phase, gentle physical touch, and emotional connection. The goal? Maintain more even dopamine levels. Promote oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone. Is this realistic for everyone? Probably not, but it's food for thought. For some couples, especially with well-managed ADHD, it could be a meaningful experiment. Sex and ADHD is a huge topic, and yet it's often ignored, misunderstood, or treated with gimmicky advice. Decades ago, I began learning about these challenges in my discussion groups, long before most clinicians or writers would go near it. In fact, even most clinicians with some understanding of ADHD figured that sex was an ADHD-free zone. In other words, you weren't doing paperwork, so what's the problem? My attempts to find info from sex therapists ran aground. They just didn't know. It's not that much better now. Since then, I've written extensively about common phenomenon around ADHD and sex. A full chapter in Is It You, Me, or Adult ADD? A standalone short book, Adult ADHD and Sex, What You Need to Know. That sex therapists cannot tell you. And an in-depth chapter in ADHD-Focused Couple Therapy, Clinical Interventions, co-authored with Dr. Arthur Robin. You'll find all those links in the podcast description. You'll also find the link to the full blog post on which this podcast episode is based. There is also a free download, a book about the Karezza method. If you or your partner have noticed this pattern of post-sex sadness or irritability, know this: you're not alone, and there are ways to understand it, work with it, and prevent it from damaging intimacy and connection. Thanks for listening. I'm Gina Pera, and I'll catch you next time on the ADHD roller coaster.